So now this is how I set up my Android-based digital audio players to optimize the user experience. Hey folks, I'm Mark Ryan, this is Super Review, and this is a new series that I'm calling Waveguide, where I'm going to focus more on tutorials type content, just helpful content to improve your audio, your journey in this audiophile space. And it's made possible by today's sponsor, Hi-Fi Go. So I've been using digital audio players for about 7 years. Okay, if you don't count like iPods and stuff back in the day, I've been using audiophile focused audio players for about 7 years now. And I find that the user experience really does end up being the make it or break it kind of factor when it comes to whether or not I love a player. And I generally find that Android-based audio players are the most customizable. And because of that, I can set them up the way that I like it. Now, because there's a lot of options in how you can customize it, people often ask me, how do I set up my players? And well, that's what we're going to talk about today. There's a couple of main goals that I have when I'm doing this, all right? Goal number one is simplicity and reducing distractions, right? This thing is Android based, right? So it has the risk of just being as annoying as a smartphone, and like, why not use a smartphone in the first place? Well, I don't like using a smartphone for my music library, but I do like to make sure that my Android player is as simple and as not smartphone-like as possible. So that's some of my customizations. The other customizations are going to be about just optimizing my interface with my offline music library, okay? I know these days most people are listening to streaming services, Spotify, Apple Music, etc. And I do put those on my Android-based players. It's nice to be able to have access to those when I want to, but primarily I listen to an offline music library, which is just a library of FLAC files that I've gotten from Bandcamp, or I've downloaded from Qobuz, or I've even ripped from music CDs my own. And that's how I prefer to listen to music, and I like to just optimize the way that I interface with that library, both in terms of how I use it, right? But also reducing the inconveniences of using an offline music library because, well, let's be frank, people use streaming services for a reason. So that's just kind of like a general overview of why I make these customizations, but now we're going to dive into the actual specifics. And for this presentation here, I'm going to be using the Fiio JM21. This is a new Android-based audio player. It's actually available on Hi-Fi Go, so I will have it linked in the description down below. But most of these customizations that I'll be going over are going to work for pretty much all Android-based audio players. I know like Fiio players and Hiby players, which are the kinds that I have here on the screen right now, are usually really good about giving me all the options that I need. Some of the other players will limit some certain settings and stuff like that, but for the most part, this is how I set up all of my audio players, okay? And we're going to go through these things in a couple of categories. We're going to go through device settings. Well, actually, you know what? You don't need to go through the categories right now. Let's just dive into it. So the first thing that I'll do is I will go into the device settings and I'll look for a couple of options that are sometimes there, sometimes not there, but this is what I do, okay? First of all, I want to mute notifications. I do not want any notification sounds coming in. This is, again, kind of playing into that, making this as unphone-like as possible. Now here on the Fiio JM21, I actually don't need to do that, but here on this Hiby, this is a good example of what I'm talking about, right? So you can go into the settings of the player, go down into sound, and usually around here is where you'll have some option for, you know, something like a ringtone and notification volume. Just drop that all the way down to 0. There's an alarm volume. For some reason on this one, I can only set it to 1. I would love to set it to 0. Not that I'm ever going to have an alarm play on this thing, but I never want it to by accident. And if it did, well, I hope I don't hear it. And then the other thing that I'll check for is that sometimes these audio players will have like a setting like this where you can set the max volume for your music. Just go ahead and crank that up to the top. Not because I recommend listening as loud as possible, but you just don't want to run into, basically you want to be able to control the volume with the normal volume controls and not run into some accidental setting that's in the settings that's preventing you from getting as much output as possible. Okay. What else do I do? So sometimes, here's another thing that I sometimes do, and I'm not afraid to admit this, is I'll go into the settings and sometimes, let's go down to the display section. A lot of the times there's this setting for font size, okay? And you can, let me do this correctly, you can increase the general font size. And this is a setting that doesn't just affect the screen, doesn't just affect the settings screen on your phone or on your audio player, but it will be used kind of throughout Android experience. Different apps will look at what your font size setting is and adjust the UI accordingly. Because a lot of these digital audio players are on smaller screens than your average smartphone, sometimes the interfaces end up just being smaller than they're supposed to be. And by going in here and increasing the font size, a lot of times you can just kind of bump it up and end up with an interface that actually works better for you. Of course, also it makes the font bigger if you've got to wear glasses like I do. What else do I do? There's another important setting that I look for in here that sometimes you can find under display, but also more reliably you can find it under security. So go into security and I look for the setting. Sometimes it's hidden under more and sometimes it's not. I don't know why Android's so inconsistent here. But look for this setting right here. It's called app pinning, okay? And by enabling app pinning, I guess I'll give you a demonstration of what this does in the future or in a little bit, but basically there's an issue with using an Android-based player. At least the way that I use it is I will log into my Google Play account and use that to download apps that I've previously purchased, right? But because this thing is now connected to my Google Play account, if somebody were to pick this thing up and access it, they would be able to access my Google Drive. They'd be able to access anything that I've logged into on Chrome, right, for example. And that is kind of a significant security issue. And well, I guess the workaround to that is that you can enable a passcode so that you have to type in a password every time you turn on the device, but that becomes annoying. And again, in the pursuit of making this thing as unphone-like as possible, app pinning will basically let you fix the phone to a single app so that every time you want to turn on the screen to use the app, you don't have to enter your password. But anytime you want to close that app and use a different app, you do need to use a password. And I'll demonstrate that in a little bit. But for me, it's important to enable this thing and then also lock the screen, lock the device when you unpin, right? And I like to set up a password, so we'll just set up a generic password here. We'll go 0000. I would recommend picking a better password than this, but for presentation purposes here, we'll go with 0000. There you go. And here, you can kind of customize however you prefer, what level of security you want. I'm fine with show all notification content. But yeah, so now with that, I've got app pinning enabled. And I guess just to kind of show you real quickly what app pinning looks like, basically, let's swipe up like this. So I'm on the settings app. I normally would do this with the music app that I'm using, but then tap this icon up here at the top, and now you'll have this option to pin the app, all right? It's going to tell you that the app is pinned, but now the app is pinned, and that basically just means that now when I turn off the screen and turn it back on, it's going to return me right to that app. I don't have to type in my password every time, and if I want to get out of this app, you have to swipe up and hold, and then it's going to go to your passcode, where now you can type in that passcode that we set up, and that's how you use the rest of the audio player, right? So I hope it's clear why that's really important, is just be secure with your device and minimize the negative impact of having a password on there by using app pinning and just pinning your music app so that it's easy to get to. Okay, anything else to get to in this settings? I don't think so. So now we're going to start diving into apps that I install on my device to configure it the way I like. So right now we're looking at this this file exactly as it comes out of the box, but there's a handful of things that I like to do to customize the experience and again, just minimize how phone-like it looks. So to do that, I'm going to log into the Google Play Store, which I've already done. Okay, say no to that. And there's a couple of apps I install. So the first one I'm going to go install is an app called Overlay Battery Bar. Let's see if we can get that to show up here. All right, and it's this app right here. And basically what this app does is it just puts a battery indicator across the top of the screen. And I'll show you why this is important. All right, it's going to ask you for permission to display over other apps. This is normal. Grant it that permission. We'll go back to it. Hit start the bar, and now you can see that the battery life is now indicated by this little bar, this white bar along the top of the screen. Now you might be wondering, why do that? It just has 92% right up there. Why would I need to do that? So that's because of what I just went through with the app pinning, all right? So I'm gonna pin this app as an example. When you pin an app, it hides this top bar. right? And I now no longer see what my battery life is. And the worst thing in the world is picking up an audio player, wanting to listen to music and not realizing that you should have charged it last time you listened. So for me, it's very important to be able to have the battery life always visible. And using that overlay battery bar just means that it is always visible no matter which app, or yeah, I guess no matter which app I've used. And I've got that pinned app functionality enabled. And it's also, yeah, just kind of clean, right? It's like this up here just feels like very technical information. Like I don't want all this. I just want it to feel less like a phone. And again, I think this little simple interface helps me with that. Okay, so we've got overlay battery bar enabled. We've got the app pinning enabled. What is the app that I want to pin? Well, of course, most of these players are going to come with their own music app installed. And some of them are okay. Some of them are kind of annoying in different ways. My preferred way to interface with my music library is through an app called Poweramp, which is not this one. So I'm going to close this one. We're going to go back into the Google Play Store, and I'm going to search for Poweramp to show you what this app is all about. All right. So now, if you've never used Poweramp before, just note that this is a paid application. I think the price is $8, which I know people have different feelings about paying for apps. I think if you've already bought a $200 plus digital audio player, spending an extra $8 to get an optimal interface, I think is worth it. And plus, I bought this thing, I don't know, 5 years ago, and I've been using this software on all of my audio players since. I think it is very much worth owning. So yeah, let's install the app. And it kind of comes in two different parts. There's the trial, which you can install for free and test it out and see if it's what you want. But then there's also a full version unlocker. This is the part that you have to pay for. And it is the part indeed that I have paid for. So I get to install it without having to buy it again. And I like that. But this is basically, I'll just immediately open this thing up and it'll tell me that Poweramp is unlocked. So now this is going to automatically open up Poweramp. And initially, I guess I'll say up front, like with Poweramp, the reason I like this interface, and actually, hold on real quick. Let me give this thing access to my music library so we can actually look at my music library. So I've already got music on my SD card. All right, this is a lot of UI. Get rid of all those hints. So the reasons I generally like Poweramp are a couple fold. All right, one, I just really like the interface. It's got these nice big swipe inputs that I don't have to be particular about where my finger is. I don't have to make sure I'm touching just the right perfect pixel on the edge of the screen. I just swipe and it's nice and easy. I really like that. It's nice. The other thing is that it does a couple of things I think better than other audio players that I think most people are going to agree with. For starters, like I think that it's really good at it's really fast at scanning my music library. So we're going to watch it do it here in real time. But I've got about 4,000 tracks on the memory card in this thing. And on a typical audio player, when you add music to your library, you have to go into the app and rescan your music library. A lot of times it just like rescans the entire library. It can take like 5+ minutes for a library of my size. Poweramp is just really good about doing it in the background and I don't have to go look for a button to trigger the functionality to resync my music library, and I don't have to wait for it to finish to continue using the rest of my music library. It's just generally really quite good. What it's doing right now, I guess here you go. It's finding all my songs. It hasn't quite categorized everything yet, but there you go. It's got my albums, my artists. Yeah, this is generally how I like it. Now you can also, this is highly customizable if you're particular about it. You can shrink the interface if you want to fit more into screen if you want, or just browse it as it is out of the box, but generally quite like it. Now the other thing that's really nice about all this stuff is there's a lot of settings in Poweramp. In fact, so many settings that I was actually kind of turned off by the app the first time I used it, because I don't like getting all fiddly with my settings. I like being able to have a setup that I can port from one device to another and just migrate and not be completely sucked and stuck in this exact installation of it. But thankfully, they do a really good job of giving this option to go down here into the settings. You can import settings from an external file. So I have a backup of my settings that I can just access via Google Drive, import it, and it's just going to automatically set up in my music library and make it look the way that I'm used to it looking. If you want I'm not going to go through all the individual settings right now in Poweramp because that wouldn't be that exciting, but if you do want my specific exact settings, I'm actually going to make a download available in the description down below, so check that out. But that is, I think, as much as I need to show you about Poweramp. Oh no, there's actually a couple other things I wanted to mention while we've got the music library available. So the couple of the things that I like that this does better than a lot of other audio players. One, it just alphabetizes the bands that start with the in the correct letter. All right, The Cure is a C band. It is not a T band, and Poweramp does that correctly. The other thing that they do really well is that make it possible to listen to all albums in order, right? So I can hit this all songs button, and rather than just diving into a single album, it's going to basically unfold all of the albums in order, basically in the year that they were released. And I can then just listen to these albums front to back. And that's how I happen to listen to my music library. Maybe you don't really care about that, but that is a functionality that a lot of other baked in audio players don't do that I really appreciate about Poweramp. Of course, you're not just stuck to using Poweramp. You can use other apps, including Spotify, Apple Music, etc., etc. I personally use Spotify for a couple of reasons. I just like that the library has kind of everything I want, and usually when I'm using a streaming service, I'm using it for discovery purposes more so than like my main mode of listening to music. But Spotify also has a couple of other options that are really nice. Like there's a feature called Spotify Connect where I can listen to music on my desktop computer and then just send it over to my audio player if I've got Spotify installed on this. And I really do appreciate that as well. And then if, for whatever reason, I think Spotify runs pretty well on all of these devices. All of the modern Android devices can run Spotify pretty well. But if you're using an older Android device, Spotify can be pretty slow. It is a processor intensive application. But thankfully, there is an app out there called Spotify Lite that you can find. It might not be available in the Play Store in your region, but you can find ways to get that app. And that one, I've found it runs on everything I put it on. So that's something to look out for. Okay. Apart from the streaming apps, there's another app I want to show you, which is called DriveSync. And the reason I use this app is, well, like I mentioned, streaming is not my primary mode of listening to music. Mostly I listen to an offline library. And, well, I can plug in a memory card in this thing, and I can take the memory card out, plug it into my computer, drag and drop files, and then put it back over here. But I think that's a pain in the butt. I think that's a little bit old school. And one of the reasons I really like Android is this application right here. It's called Autosync for Google Drive. There's also a version of it that is more, here, I'll zoom in on this. This one right here is what you want. Autosync by the company Meta Control is the company. This is basically the same app, but this version is only for Google Drive. The other version of the app is compatible with other services, including Dropbox, Mega. I think it might even, I don't know. It's compatible with a ton of cloud storage services. So whatever you use, I think the general app is going to be pretty good for you. Here's what I do. I use Google Drive both on my digital audio player as well as on my computer. And I keep my music library on my computer stored in a folder that is automatically synced with Google Drive. And then with this application, Autosync for Google Drive, what I can do is I can connect it to my Google Drive account and have it just sync my music library without having to remove the memory card. And that ends up being kind of a big deal. So I'm just going to connect this real quick. So now once DriveSync or AutoSync or whichever of those applications you get is connected to your service, you basically want to sync a folder, right? So I'll go into folder sync, I'll add a folder, and here's, give it a name. Let's call it, we'll be inventive and we'll call it music. Pick the remote storage. So this is where in Google Drive I have my music library. And then I choose where on the device I want it to store to, which is my micro SD card. Now, once you have the folder set up, there's a couple of other settings in here that I recommend picking. So the sync method, synchronizing these two different folders, there's a couple of different ways that you can do it. The way I prefer to do it is this one called download mirror. Basically what this means is that any files that get uploaded to my Google Drive space will automatically be downloaded and copied in the exact same folder structure and stuff onto the SD card here, but it's not going to try and sync files from this device up to my Google Drive cloud. You can do that if you want. That's just not how I use Google Drive in my music library. Another option to consider, because Google Drive and these other cloud services are paid services, so if your music library is large, you're probably going to have to pay between $2 to $10 a month in order to use the cloud storage. But a lot of them do have free options. I think Google Drive gives you 15 gigabytes of free storage. A 15 gigabyte music library is probably not going to be sufficient to store your entire music library. It certainly isn't for me. But there is another option that you can do here, which is this option that says download then delete. Rather than like storing your entire music library on Google Drive, basically what you can do with this option is you can just put the new music that you want to transfer onto Google Drive into the Google Drive on your computer, and then you have this download then delete option enabled in the Drive Sync program. And what that'll do is it'll see that new music, it'll download it to your computer, or sorry, to your DAP, and then it will erase it from the cloud storage. That'll then free up more space so that you can drag your new music on in the future. But again, for me, because I do have my entire music library stored up there and I don't want it deleted, I just use this download mirror option. So I'll save that. And then there's one other thing I recommend. By default, it's going to enable this Autosync option, which is a really cool idea. Basically, it will just periodically check in the background if there's new changes, new files that have been uploaded, and automatically sync them to your device. And you can make it so that it does it, once every hour, once a day, whatever configure or whatever iteration you prefer. I, however, have been disabling this option as of late for one big reason. The micro SD card, generally they'll have like a write count, or like there's a write limit of like 10,000 read and write that you can do on a micro SD card before it starts to go bad and starts to no longer reliably store data. I've run into this myself using digital audio players, using Drive Sync, and I think it's because it's just constantly writing files to them all throughout the day, and that ends up just kind of destroying a memory card. So I prefer to disable Autosync, and I'll just do the syncing manually. I'll set up a button so I can just do it with one button press whenever I know there's new music. And then that ends up being, I think, just a better solution. Okay, I'll show you exactly what that one button setup looks like in a little bit. But to do that, we're gonna have to do my next modification, which is installing a new launcher that's called Niagara Launcher. If you're not familiar with Niagara Launcher, okay, the launcher interface is basically this that you see here. Kind of your core home screen is what a launcher is. And I feel like, again, just in the spirit of trying to minimize UI and trying to reduce distractions and making this feel less like a smartphone, I think Niagara Launcher does a really, really good job of that. So I'm going to go ahead and install this. Now, I will warn you that Niagara Launcher, like Poweramp, is a paid application. I've previously bought it, so I'm able to install it on all my digital audio players. But it's not cheap. Like right now, I think the price is $30, but it looks like the price is going up to $45, which that feels like a lot of money for a launcher. Again, given how much use I've gotten out of it, I'm perfectly happy to have bought it. But if you're not sure you'll like it, I think there is at least a free trial. You can check it out, or you can just look for other launchers out there that hopefully will let you customize the experience and get something similarly streamlined, because that's what I really love about Niagara. So I'm going to launch it. It's going to ask me, to set it as my default launcher, which I want it to do. And I'll be honest, like there's actually some kind of annoying, obnoxious setup stuff here with Niagara. But once you get past this initial onboarding, this just really does end up being my favorite way to interface with an audio player. So like one of the things that it does is it asks you to pick your favorite apps, which, okay, that sounds like kind of an obvious thing, but it's not so much, because here's what it does, is it will change what apps you have accessible from your home screen. And one thing that's really cool about this is that we just installed the Google Drive Sync You can also do shortcuts. So you go into add a shortcut, and here's what it's telling me, asking me for which launcher to use as default. But here's my shortcut options, and now because I have DriveSync installed, I'll now have a shortcut option called Sync Now. So I'll add that as a favorite as well, hit the check mark, and here's kind of the initial onboarding stuff I mentioned. This is annoying. Let me just go through all this stuff. Okay, so now that I've gone through all of that, you can see that now my home screen is quite streamlined. It's 3 apps and this navigation that lets me get to all my other apps if I want to. But primarily, I'm just going to be interfacing with these few apps right here. Now, I'm not done setting this thing up. There's more settings that I will go into to make this interface look as nice as possible. And I did also notice that Niagara recently gave me a similar similar functionality to import settings. I haven't used that yet, so I don't know if it's going to work well, but I'll give you a sense of some of the customizations or how I set this thing up. So one, I almost always change the default, the font to the system font. What else do I do? I will hide the alphabet on the home screen. I don't need that. And I'll hide the names of my favorites because I've only got a few apps there. I know what they are. I'm just really trying to minimize the look. Anything else that I wanted to do here? Let's see. I don't think so. So now we'll close that and we'll see that this is what my interface looks like, which is nice and clean. Actually, here's one more thing I'll do. That's not it. I'll make my app icons bigger because these look pretty small. So there we go. This is a nice clean interface. And here's another thing that's really nice about Niagara. Once you start playing music and you pop back out, it's going to give you this little player widget here, which is that's pretty neatly integrated in there. And I dig that. Now I'll also usually customize my, my wallpaper here. I'm not going to make you sit through and watch me do that, but I will make this wallpaper available as a download again in the description down below if you want to use the same wallpaper that I do, which is squiggling / super review themed. All right, that's looking pretty spiffy to me. And to be honest, like this is more or less how I set up my digital audio players. I use Poweramp as my primary mode of listening to my music. I will use app pinning to make sure that I don't have to type in my password every time I want to use it. And if I do need to get past Poweramp, I will type in my password. Oh, it's one too many zeros. And interface with something as simple and bare bones as Niagara Launcher. I've been using this setup for years on my digital audio players. Again, like I mentioned, it really does work on pretty much all Android players. There's some players that I've experienced where I can't customize a launcher. There's some players that I've experienced where I can't use app pinning, and that's kind of annoying. But the file players here and the Hiby players that I've all used, those all seem to support all these customizations, which is perfect. There is like another step that you can take. If you wanted to have like system-wide EQ and the Android player that you're using doesn't have it. There's some popular apps, but Poweramp has a system-wide EQ functionality, and Wavelet, I believe is what it's called. I don't use those personally, so I haven't demonstrated that for you. But if you're interested in playing around with EQ, I would recommend looking into that a little bit. But I think that is going to do it. Yeah, again, a quick shout out to Hi-Fi Go for sponsoring Waveguide and making this content possible. If you have any other ideas for content, topics to talk about, the tutorial type content that could either help you or maybe just help new people to the hobby, please leave those suggestions in the comments down below. Otherwise, I'll catch you in the next super review. Cheers.
Join with the force of reviews. We now have the tools to brave the misleading world of audio fools. Hey, this review is super, and so are you. Grab your headphones, sniff a graph, and share your thoughts in this pursuit.